I'm here this week with our first guest, Town Manager Paul Cohen. We appreciate you coming on the show.
It's great to be back again, Joe.
Yeah, it seems like we have a pretty busy fall going on, and certainly we love having you on the show because you're the person that knows really probably the most about what's going on in Chelmsford, and so you can kind of give the residents kind of an insight as to what happens during this time of the year.
Yeah, it's a busy night in terms of town meeting coming up, but it's just everything comes back. School's back in session, football teams playing, a lot of activity going on in terms of development in town, and as you said, on the 16th of October, we get highlighted by the fall annual town meeting.
I know, it's crazy. You highlighted the fact that things kind of come back, but it's like planning board meetings, you get the hallways of town hall are packed, even just the ancillary committees that meet on a weekly basis.
Yep.
I don't know how you keep up with it all, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we just take it a day at a time, a week at a time, a season at a time, and that's the only way we can do it. But it's just amazing. And I think as you know, being on the Economic Development Committee, there's just a lot going on in terms of commercial development potential in the community.
There is,
and so that's taking a lot of effort as well from the Economic Development Commission to the Board of Selectmen, Planning Board. There's hearings for housing projects. I mean, look at all the housing projects that are before the town now.
Right.
Unprecedented, the amount of rental units that are before the community right now. I think the number I heard was like 450 potential rental units, which would essentially almost double the town's rental housing stock.
Right. Now, it's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that first before we get into town meeting. As a town, right, your job as a town manager, I mean, you try to help facilitate all this stuff and make sure that people have the processes and things that are in place. But ultimately the boards and the residents are the ones that kind of weigh in on it, right? So whether you're really in favor of a project or not is kind of a moot point, right? It finally gets to a board and they're going to ultimately make that decision, right?
Yeah, our job is to facilitate the process. Now, for example, on these housing projects, you've got two boards. Some are doing the conventional 40B approach, which is like the one that was approved on Hunt and Littleton Road for the Emmanuel project. That went through the Board of Appeals, and so the job of Evan Belansky, who's the Community Development Director, and I is to meet with the applicants, explain how the process works, help them prepare the project, not for approval, but to prepare to have a complete and efficient hearing. Because there's nothing that abutters find less desirable than having prolonged continuances or prolonged hearings. So basically you want to make sure is, look, let them go there prepared, and so we'll facilitate a review by the fire chief, fire inspectors or the building inspector, or the conservation commission and so forth, so that the process when it gets before the board, for the sake of the board as well as the neighbors and the applicant, is an effective process. And then you also have the new housing projects under the new comprehensive overlay bylaw in the commercial district in town. And so right now you've got the process on Turnpike Street. So you've got 164 units being proposed. So that's now going before the planning board under the new bylaw, and it's the same process. How do we make that process efficient so that when the neighbors come out, again, they can hear the full project? Because I think as a neighbor, it'd be very frustrating to go there and say, oh, well, we'll come back with that at the next meeting. Well, how many nights are you expecting the neighbors to come out to a hearing, no matter which way they fall on a project? And so that's our role, is to facilitate. And as you said, ultimately that's what town meeting as well. Our job is to facilitate items for the town's consideration. And then the voters decide at town meeting, and as the town meeting reps, the planning board decides on a housing project, the Board of Appeals may decide, and obviously the selectmen weigh in if it has to do with the matters such as liquor licenses or other applications before the Board of Selectmen. So our job is as the name suggests, is to be support staff. Get this so that as an appointed or elected official, you can fulfill your job efficiently, because as you said, not only is it the nights, but it's also the amount of time you're at these meetings. I mean, there are meetings going on for hours. The Finance Committee met last Thursday, and they were there from 7:30 till 10 after 11. And so, and again, they wanted to get their work done, but that's a long stretch.
I think it's interesting. So the Finance Committee, right, you go there and you present these articles, you give your positions on it so that they can weigh in and give their recommendations. And then you kind of do the same thing all over again for the Board of Selectmen or potentially Planning Board or some of these others. By the time you get to town meeting, how many times have you regurgitated the same article?
Well, it also goes to the town meeting information session.
Right.
So then you go to the town meeting information session, present all 31, and then 6 days later you're back before the full town meeting presenting it once again. So what I've tried to do is when it gets to the town meeting, I try to recede and then put the department heads presenting. So oftentimes you'll see me, if it's a case like the marijuana one, well, have the police chief go up there and speak. Or if it's a question of, something to do with economic development, well then have the community development director or the chair of the economic development committee speak. I think it does two things. One is I wouldn't want to hear from the same person after 31 articles, and two is it also gives them the exposure and also the ability to go to the direct source. If there's a concern regarding why the constable should be appointed, well, let's hear from the police chief because it's a public safety consideration, rather than me sort of explaining why the chief wants to do this. So you're right. It's sort of early on. I'm sort of trying to spare them from all the repeated nights out. But when it gets to the town meeting, I sort of recede bit and put them up there. And I think it's effective. I mean, I think just in terms, like I said, the mixed at town meeting. But yeah, you are going through the process from early on in terms of what should be considered at town meeting, given the first list of articles in August through October. So it's like a 10-week period where you're just enhancing or representing the discussion items for the town.
Yeah, because sometimes by the time I get to town meeting, I've heard it so many times, like I already have a complete position almost made on it.
Yeah.
Unless I hear something just completely different than what I've already heard during that time period, I'm pretty much set on voting.
Right.
So going 4 nights is usually a
Yeah.
pretty cumbersome process.
Exactly.
But, I know we have a ton of town meeting articles that are coming up. You want to give us some highlights on some of them?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's some significant things that I always look at is what would people look back at the fall 2017 town meeting and remember it for. First one's going to be the Chelmsford Forum. The forum legislation that made it the Chelmsford Forum back in 1998 is expiring in 2018, so next June. So we have an opportunity under that legislation to acquire the asset. And the beauty of this one is the wisdom back in 97, 98 when they were drafting this is the town can acquire the forum for the appraised value, which in this case is $2.7 million. However, we can purchase at the net price less the capital improvements that we put into the facility over the last 19 years. And the good part about that is we put in $1.5 million of improvements that the state inspector general has certified will then reduce our acquisition cost to $1.2 million. So to me, it becomes the ultimate no-brainer. You're going to get an asset that's worth $2.7 million for $1.2 million. The other part is by doing all those improvements, you're also getting an asset that's in good condition. So it sort of was a double win. And you can imagine within the last 5 or 6 years, we saw this endpoint coming. So that's why you saw us at town meeting saying, well, wait a minute, let's put in the new roof and these other improvements because not only is it needed in a building that was built in '64, but it also is going to get us a credit on the acquisition price. So it ended up being a win-win for us. So I think that'll be a big one. That's Article 6. Article 7, the Chelmsford Forum. So that's a big article, which again, I think when people will see the improvements that were made in the ice surface, the locker rooms and everything, they'll say, yeah, this is a good asset because if you don't have that asset, you then have the need for where does the high school play their hockey, and that's and we do see other communities have their own ice rinks, whether it's Billerica, Wilmington, and so forth. So that's a good article.
And it's somewhat self-sufficient too, right? They have their
it costs nothing on the tax levy because much like the golf course, the ice rink basically pays for itself from the revenue that comes in from selling ice time and use of the facility. So going forward, if we pay for $1.2 million, that'll be borrowed over a 10-year period, and the debt service will be paid from the use of the forum. And what we've done there since its inception, the community has had a private rink manager, so somebody who's experienced in the field that runs other ice rinks manage the facility. So therefore, that model I anticipate would go forward in the future. So that's a good asset for the community, much like the golf course. Another big one at town meeting, which you're very familiar with, is the economic development position. There's a position to put on a full-time person in what basically we're calling a business development director of business development in order to assist the efforts that are underway for the redevelopment of the 129 corridor, as well as keep the momentum and be in touch with the efforts in the other parts of town. Because I think too often we only speak of 129, but it's not just 129. I mean, there's activity going on in Drum Hill. There's certainly a lot of activity going going on in Route 40, off of Route 3, and even Chelmsford Street. That's another off-ramp to both 495 and Route 3. That's in a constant state of motion in terms of what's going on out there. We talked about the housing developments, all of which are by the highway, but also there's economic development activities, such as we're seeing for the auctions coming up on Omni Way, the future auction on the former Mercury computer site on River Neck Road. So there's a lot of activity. So this position would sort of enhance our efforts of just, of being more thorough, I guess is probably the best way to describe it. You may recall earlier in the year, we were able to add elevate the vacancy in my office to an assistant town manager process. Now, I'm still as busy as ever, but I think having Mike McCall on board lets us to do things a little more thoroughly than we've probably done in the past. And so I think, again, with the economic development position, it just brings another party to the table in terms of the town manager, the assistant town manager, the board of selectmen, the community development director, the economic development commission. So now we'll have a director of business development that I think will, again, enhance the efforts. And you say, well, what has to be enhanced? I think it's more the outreach, because part of it is you want to not only be recruiting new companies to town, but you want to be in touch with the existing companies and find out, what are their retention needs? How do we keep them when the lease comes up to Chelmsford, and do that? And that's a constant effort, because the companies nowadays usually don't own the buildings that they're located in. Usually they're in for leases of 10, 15 years, or sometimes even less, depending upon the nature of the company. And so it's a competitive market. So the whole idea is to keep on your toes and to be competitive with people, and in terms of recognizing what their needs are. And it may not just be in terms of recruitment, but it also might be in terms of what do they need for workforce development, what do they need for infrastructure, in terms of roads or utility improvements. So it's a lot of outreach that I think, again, helps benefit the community, because it keeps our diversity as a community in terms of, not only a good place to live and to be educated, but also a good place to work and obviously to visit.
And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. I mean, if an owner is not willing to improve a facility, and a company wants, better, I think we saw that with Goodrich a number of years ago, and so I know that Chelmsford tries best they can to try to retain at the highest level.
Sometimes they outgrow your space. Like with Kronos, they outgrew Chelmsford. We just didn't have the space. And so what they are in a tower of their own now, and the sign's up, and I think that they needed and wanted to be under one roof. We just couldn't accommodate that. Other times, the problem is it's like you said, it's with the property owner. You can have a tenant who's coming up for renewal, but if there's uncertainty in terms of the future use of that building, in terms of, well, gee, we're only 60% of the building, the rest of the building's untenanted. What's the future of this real estate trust that's holding it? Then that's beyond your control. And part of that was the case with Goodrich, quite frankly. They knew that the owner of that building was underwater, and how could they risk the future of their company and by trying to renew a lease? So it's some things are beyond your control. I think what the community sees and what you hear about are often the success stories.
Right.
But as you said, there's many stories that never make it to success, where a company relocates or comes in on the other side, and it sort of comes in quietly. Something like DCU, which is being lauded recently in terms of the old Kronos headquarters, that was a quiet acquisition. And I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, Evan Blansky and I, are solely responsible for bringing them to Chelmsford. No, that was one where it worked as you would expect it would work. The brokers, the property owner, town officials, and said, hey, look, this is a solution that can work for their needs as a second headquarters facility. Then you get some of the other stuff like the Amazon discussion. Is Amazon going to come to Chelmsford or Berwick or Massachusetts? The way we've looked at it is one, we've discussed that as a economic development entity in terms of the Middlesex 3 Coalition. But we also said, you know what? For the sake of this exercise, which isn't going to be very lengthy because of their time frame, we may learn lessons in terms of, that type of, it's almost like doing a mock drill. By going through that exercise and that effort, you kind of learn things along the way that probably are going to be applicable to another major employer. So I think that effort, and like I said, we've been involved through the Middlesex 3 Coalition in terms of, you're going to dream for the stars with Amazon, but I think I think the likelihood is it's more of, it kind of gives you that self-assessment what's going to happen. So that's another big one at town meeting in terms of economic development position. Probably the big one that'll take a whole session, I expect, is the whole recreational marijuana bylaws. I mean, the vote was made in 2016, almost a year ago. The legislature made its amendments back in July, and now Chelmsford, which was one of the communities that voted against the legalization of recreational marijuana, has to decide to amend its general bylaws and zoning bylaw, or basically take a moratorium in terms of what to do with marijuana, recreational marijuana. That one's a tough one, and I think there will be some lengthy discussion because the fact is, it's now will be legalized, and well, it's not legal, but the retail will be available as of July 1. So the whole questions about whether it should be legalized or not are gone. I mean, it's now legal for recreational marijuana. And then the other reality is we expect that communities adjacent to us will adopt, retail outlets. And given the fact that there are retail outlets in your adjoining communities and that they can deliver into your community, now what does Chelmsford do? Because let's use Drum Hill as an example. As we know, Drum Hill is a very busy commercial corridor right off of Route 3, volumes of traffic, and the tens of thousands of vehicles go through there to go to Lowell and back each day and across the river. Well, if Chelmsford, it's kind of like the liquor store that sells at the gas station up on Drum Hill. Chelmsford could say, no, we're not going to provide recreational marijuana, but yet someone could open it right at the other side of Parkhurst Road, and then not only have the sales there, but then also be able to deliver into the community. And similarly at the Lowell boundary, because we expect Lowell, in addition to Tingsboro, will be at least 2 communities that will have retail outlets, in 2018, early 2019 timeframe. So now the question is the town has to weigh, given that we're going to have this issue, what do we want to do? The one hand argument is, well, we don't want this in our community, and therefore it creates issues of public safety, health, impacts on inspections, and aspects of wherever we would zone this to take place in the community. On the other hand, you then have the revenue component saying, well, if you're going to have the impacts, should you at least get a share of the revenue? Because you can put a 3% excise tax on recreational marijuana sales, which no one knows the exact numbers because all you can do is draw a parallel to Colorado, but it could be, let's say it's upwards to $150,000 or $200,000 annually. And then you also have a 5-year implementation phase where you can also get another 2% or so up to 5 years. So let's say, 3% up to 5 years. So that could be another $1 million in one-time monies, and then let's say 150, 200 annually. Does that outweigh the downside of having that, sold in the community? Or do you just wait? Which I think what Baric is doing, they're going to propose a moratorium to say, you know what, maybe we'll do marijuana, but not now. And even if the town does vote not now, that doesn't prohibit it from coming back at a future date. But I think that's the big discussion is how do we respond, to the marijuana? And I think, again, as you said, the answer is whatever the town meeting decides is best. And the job that I do and the police chief and my assistant, Mike McCall, try to do is say, hey, look, here's the information that we have to the best of our knowledge, and we present this to you, and now you as a community make a vote. And we've seen the planning board split on this issue. The selectmen were unanimously in favor of not allowing marijuana establishments. Finance committee, sort of was split in terms of they didn't want the article, but they could see that, there's a concern, so they recommend against allowing marijuana establishments. But I think town meeting's going to go in there, the 162. They'll hear all the information. Obviously, you've done some work ahead of time, and then we'll make a decision. And again, whatever they decide.
But even if they vote, it still has to go to the voters, or no?
No.
Oh, okay, because the community had already voted no?
Right, which is sort of a first in Massachusetts. The legislature said, well, if a community voted against it on the ballot in 2016, they don't have to do another ballot vote.
Okay. I confused it with the constable, that's
right.
why.
So that'll be interesting. But however, if you wanted to go back in the future, let's say we prohibit it now and then you wanted to change it, or if you didn't do anything within a certain number of years, then you would have to do the ballot vote. So I think the ballot vote is only available for a limited time. I think it's 3 years for those communities that voted against it.
The moratorium, how long does that usually last?
They're talking a year. They wanted October of 2018. The difficulty with the 1 year is if the law doesn't become effective till July 1, how much are you really going to know from July 1 of 18 to October of 18?
Right.
And even if you did 6 months, let's say you could do it, let's go to December 31st of 18, which might be pushing the edge of what the Attorney General might allow, you're still only probably talking a 6-month window of exposure. So, so I think, it's really a question of, is it, do you want to be the first one in the pool? I understand that approach. The answer might be no. But like I said, I think if you realistically look at it, will you really know a lot more after a 6-month exposure to the new law?
If all 3 get voted down,
Yeah.
what does that do for the town?
Well, it leaves you sort of precarious because you don't have any zoning regulations in effect, and you also don't have a prohibition. So then the question would be, well, where can they apply? In that case, they probably would seek under retail. So therefore, at least if you do the moratorium, it gives you the ability to say, this is where we want it. And then you can come back with zoned, amendment to the zoning bylaw saying, we'll allow it, but only in these certain areas. Much like we did with the medicinal marijuana.
Right. But you can't do it through licensing, similar to they do alcohol
No.
sales?
In fact, licensing of marijuana is done at the state level.
Okay.
So unlike a liquor license that you get at the local level, the applications go through the town for zoning, but it's the state that is issuing all the marijuana licenses.
I see.
So it's a little different than alcohol.
Wow.
So that's a big one. That'll take some discussion. And then the last one we think will take some time is the constable position. The charter changes. The charter changes will probably take one night on their own, given that there's 7 articles on the charter. Some are real brief and basically, administrative or ministerial changes. But we think we're going to get a lot of discussion on the recommendation to change the constable position from appointed to elected. I'm sorry, from elected to appointed. There's 2 articles. One would eliminate the election, and the other one would make it appointed. The reason for that is, again, we're looking at how we operate in the year 2018 by the time this would become effective, or actually the end of the expired term of the current candidate. But the reason for this is that if you look forward, the concerns that the chief of police has articulated, and I support, is the nature of, look, this really is an activity of serving warrants on people's residences regarding, civil issues such as divorce, child care, and other issues like that. That ought to be coordinated and vetted through the police department. And so, the way it would be is that if it were to become an appointed position, the police chief would offer a candidate, and then through me would go to the Board of Selectmen for confirmation. And both the chief, Spinney, and I have both said we have no issue with the current constable. Charlie Woj is doing a fine job, and if that position were appointed tomorrow, we would reappoint Charlie for the foreseeable future. I think the only reason it remained in the charter today was because Bill Spence had the job for, since 1965 and until his passing a couple of years ago. So I think because of that, I think it was out of respect for Bill and the tradition, which is probably explain why hasn't it changed earlier than that. We look at all of our other towns around us, Berwick, Tewksbury, Drake, and so forth, they're all appointed constables, all vetted through the police department. So basically what we're saying is, you know what? Let's address this issue now rather than having to respond to a situation in the future, which could be unfortunate.
Yeah, I saw the police chief had talked about it. He said that his major concern is that you basically have overlapping police powers that, cause obviously some level of concern, and he wanted to, address the fact that, for public safety aspects, right, he wanted to know, where things are being served because, and we're not insulated by it by any means. Chelmsford, we obviously had, an officer that had to discharge their firearm and shot somebody in their residence because they attacked them with, a weapon of some sort. So it's not like these things don't happen and couldn't happen, here in our community. So I think there's concern about public safety for that person as an individual, not even so much that they have police powers on top of it. So, it'll be interesting to see how that goes down. And I know that Pat had abstained from the vote because her brother is the actual constable. So, any other major highlights on the town meeting? Or?
Well, we again doing another proactive one, going back to the whole rental housing. We have an article that would eliminate the town from the requirement of having to provide solid waste and recycling collection at multifamily rental developments. Same thing. We don't know of any other community in the Commonwealth that provides solid waste and recycling collection at commercial rental properties of 4 or more units. So again, if they're building 104 units over on Mill Road or at Hunt and Littleton Road, you're not. It's not like a taxpayer who's paying a condo, who owns a condo and is paying taxes. This is a commercial property owner who's basically has an operating cost for that facility, which includes solid waste and this recycling collection. We're now basically subsidizing or providing that service at no cost, and we don't think it's impacting the rents. We see no measure. The rents are driven by the market. So we're saying, well, wait a minute, why should we be doing this? Because we work with Nick Parley, who's our solid waste and recycling coordinator. We said, Nick, given these hundreds of units that are coming on, what's this going to cost the town to amend our contract? And he came back and said, basically, look, right now it's probably costing us $60,000 or $70,000 for the limited number of rental apartments we have, such as Kensington and so forth. But he says, we're at a tipping point. So if you add all these units, you now have to add another truck and driver and time to the collection routes, which then puts them onto another vehicle, which then elevates that additional cost for another couple $100,000. So when people are saying, well, we need more resources to put into the schools or public safety, we feel, again, it's responsible saying, hey, wait a minute, folks, here's an area should this be a cost that the town is bearing, or should we do like every other town that we know of does and have the commercial property owner, much like the commercial businesses, shouldn't they be able to cost? Because that's what it is. This is a commercial property investment, and therefore it's not, like I said, it's not like a homeowner with a condo. So therefore let those commercial property owners bear that cost and then free up that revenue to support other operations in the town. So again, that'll take some discussion, because anytime you're dealing with trash,
right.
You get discussions because it's not a foot in the door. I've already been approached.
It won't even be about the commercial properties. It'll be about people's individual trash and
exactly.
their pickup. Like one time, the truck missed my
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So again, those will be the big ones. But there's enough other stuff out of the 31 that I think it'll take at least 3 sessions, perhaps 4. But hopefully we can get out of there in at least within a 2-week period.
Well, it sounds all good. I know we got a couple other guests. I just want to congratulate you on your extension till what, 2020?
Yeah. My appointment's indefinite.
Okay.
What this is basically the severance agreement, or the employment agreement, as they call it, and it just governs terms of notice, the town to me, and severance and so forth for the job, and that now goes till June of 2020. And so again, at that point, like I said, I started in November of 2006, so that would be roughly about 14 years or so. And at that point, I'd probably have about 6 or 7 left in order to beat Bernie's record,
okay,
but also get to my own retirement stage. So again, I've expressed repeatedly my desire is to stay in Chelmsford until I retire, and God willing and the community willing, that will happen. So.
Well, we do hope you beat Bernie's record.
Yeah.
That would say a lot about Chelmsford,
Well,
to have such long-standing people.
And that's really common, and particularly in this area around here. I mean, you people, that the managers, the Bob Halpins and the Dennis Peendacks and the Dave Cressmans, and now the next generation. I mean, Jody Ross in Westford's been there over a decade. Rich Montori's been in Billerica now, approaching 8 years or so. You see John Curran staying in Billerica now for about his 5th year. So it is and obviously they just extended Jim Duggan and Drake and obviously hopefully Matt Hansen and Tingsboro staying for a while. So I think that the stability really does help in terms of helps the community, and also helps with those relationships going back to economic development and community development. Those relationships over time really do benefit the community in terms of the institutional knowledge as well as the team that you build in the town hall.
I'm sure you build relationships with them. Makes it easier to pick up the phone and say, hey, how have you guys approached this problem in the past? And work from there.
Exactly.
So
it worked out well.
Well, we appreciate it, and we will see you at town meeting.
Great. Looking forward to it, Joe. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.